So, yeah, he kind of beat me to what I'm talking about today, which is actually a great thing. So, I will go ahead and skip straight to the who am I stage of this. So my name is Illyana. I am a community specialist in cybersecurity. So if you don't know, I run 2 not-for-profits, besides Cheltenham and Which, and I also work locally with the Bristol and Bath cyber community. I collect jobs like they're Pokemon, so if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll probably go, she's doing what now? And when you learn that I have ADHD, I think that makes a little bit more sense. I think I am probably the shining beacon of ADHD and having 100 tasks and 100 jobs all at once. I've actually reskilled and kind of gotten into cybersecurity later in life. My background is finance. Turns out finance is really bad for people who want to be stimulated constantly. I'm not saying it's boring, but it's boring. So I think understanding why I'm talking about this and why I am so loud and proud about what I do, I actually have to tell you a bit about my story. And for me, I was misdiagnosed very, very young. So I was told at the nice age of 13 that I had bipolar disorder. If you don't know what bipolar disorder is, it's marked by massive mood swings, and the treatment, especially back then, was antidepressants. Turns out that's not what was wrong with me. However, it would take another 20 years before I would get the correct diagnosis and kind of get started in my advocacy. So, it says up there I struggled through my 20s. What did that struggle look like? It looked like doing really, really well through high school. P.S. I'm American. Not sure my accent gave that away. But I did really, really well through high school because it was incredibly structured. I could go into class, I would do my homework while the teacher was talking, and I did and had good grades. That didn't translate when I moved over to college and university. Turns out I failed it twice. And then eventually gave up and settled in finance. Yep, a dropout who worked in finance. That's scary. And that continued. I never stayed at one job for very long. 2 to 3 years was about my max. I wasn't really ever happy. I am about as stereotypical as it can get with my crafting projects. I have about, copious amounts of lye under my kitchen sink from when I thought I was going to make soap. Turns out it's really hard to dispose of. So yes, I have pretty much every stereotype. And it wasn't until lockdown and social media and Instagram that I kind of had my epiphany moment. So during lockdown, I was scrolling through and I love a good webcomic. And my Instagram algorithm was like, hey, I think you might like this one. And it was the Tiny ADHD Coach, and I will give her a lot of credit. She was also an older woman who had been diagnosed later. And she had this webcomic, and I can't even remember what it was, but it was talking about some of the main symptoms, sensitivity, prone to outbursts. But it was talking about the things that probably helped get me that misdiagnosis a lot earlier. And I turned to my partner crying because for the first time in my entire life, I had felt seen and I felt heard, and I finally kind of had an idea of what was wrong with me. And that started my diagnosis journey. My diagnosis journey took me about 2 years. Right now, the average wait time is between 4 and 5, within some areas of the country up to 8.5 years. So I was lucky. I recognized I needed help, and I got that fairly quickly in the grand scheme of what neurodiversity and getting a diagnosis is now. And turns out, once you have my ADHD under control, I was like, I'm not quite sure that covers it all. And I'm now going through my autism diagnosis. It started because I live with a partner who would probably say that he's autistic. He wouldn't ever get diagnosed, and I can understand why. And we did one of those, tests that was like, hey, this is kind of what they're going to ask you. And I got really upset because he was answering the questions wrong. Turns out I scored higher than him. Not sure that was a test I wanted to score that high on. But since then, it's been a journey. I'm also dyspraxic, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute. But the reason I can't crochet is because my fingers won't let me, is pretty much what that means. And why do I talk about it, and why do I talk about it in cybersecurity specifically? 19% of cybersecurity professionals consider themselves neurodivergent. 17% in a study And if you saw James Bohr, you'll see why I say a study, and I'm taking no responsibility for these facts. I found them online. But about 17% have disclosed. That is low. I would almost guarantee that in this field, we're looking closer to 30 to 40%. This is my own feeling, but it comes from me talking a lot about this and talking to a lot of people. It is a field that naturally fits neurodiversity and the characteristics and traits that we'll talk about very, very well. According to the UCLA Health, recent research suggests that nearly 80% of autistic women are undiagnosed by the time that they hit 18, which means they're going to hit adulthood not understanding why they don't fit in. According to CIPD survey, only 37% of neurodivergent employees feel that their organization can provide meaningful support, which means even if I come out and I disclose and I am brave, that there is, over a 60% chance that my organization has no idea how to help me, or even how to help myself. So let's talk terminology, because I've thrown a lot of words at you really, really fast. So you have neurodiverse. Neurodiverse is simply that everybody sat in this room thinks a little bit differently, kind of like a thumbprint or a fingerprint. Brains work differently. And it is just the spectrum of how all of those brains work. Neurotypical. I like bringing up neurotypical because I just said everybody's brains works a little bit differently, so how am I going to say that there's a typical way that a brain works? It is an average. It is also considered what is the socially accepted norm. So what we consider as a society is normal behavior, and someone who fits most of those patterns will be considered neurotypical. You then have neurodiversity, because we really like terminology that sounds similar and does different things. Neurodiversity talks about the umbrella of conditions that fall under being neurodivergent or having a very different or atypical way of thinking. Now, other terminology we really, really like, neurospicy, neurosparkly. Actually, I hated them when they came out. They're very much out of social media until I realized that I was talking to my mother, and just in case you're not aware, it is highly genetic. So when I was talking to my mom, if I went to her and said, I think you have ADHD, that was never going to go well. I can guarantee it. But she kind of took to this term neurospicy because it was a safe language to use. It's not as blunt as saying, I have this neurodivergence or I have this specific thing. And it makes it a lot more accessible, especially to people who are starting on their journey. So what do I mean by an umbrella term? It means that neurodivergent or neurodiversity covers quite a few common diagnoses or conditions or disorders. We don't really like using the disorder word. However, what I can say is that, the last D in the ADHD stands for disordered. It used to be ASD, which was autism spectrum disorder. But just in case you don't know what they are, I will go through a very, very, very quick run through of these, just so you're kind of aware of what's going on. Dyslexia, you mix letters around, they see backwards. They have a really cool trait, though, that they can see most things in 3D, because that's why they struggle with the letters, because actually 3D modeling makes a lot more sense for them. Dyscalculia, which I can finally say after like 2 years of giving talks about this. It is dyslexia, but for numbers. So if you've ever thought that you were just bad at math, turns out there's probably a reason why, an underlying foundation that numbers flip themselves around, don't make sense to you. You have dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is one that is incredibly hard to get diagnosed on its own, and it has everything to do with coordination. So how do your fine motor skills work? It tends to be very much more commonly diagnosed with other conditions because it's that clumsy bit of a lot of the other. If you see the amount of bruises I have, it makes a lot of sense. You have ASC, or the autism spectrum condition. That's autism. ADHD. You then have the gold standard, which is my favorite joke to make, which is AUDHD, and that is the more prevailing common diagnosis that is suddenly becoming, I think, much more prevalent because, like me, you find out that you have one, you are about 30% more likely to also have the other, and that is having ADHD and autism. You have acquired neurodiversity. Some people really don't like putting this one under the cover, and it comes with brain injury. I am very, very fortunate to know someone who talks very passionate about this, because she was in a car accident, and after her car accident has all the traits of ADHD. She loves talking about it, and she very much sees it differently because she has a very blunt before and after. And you also have Tourette syndrome. So we know Tourette syndrome from the lovely cursing trope and stereotype. Actually, that is probably the worst of the worst spectrum. What that actually normally means, if you were to see it on the street, is tics. And by tic, I mean a muscle spasm, normally repetitive. There are other things that can go under this umbrella, and there are other things that are caused by this umbrella. Depression, anxiety, other mental health disorders are often very comorbid with these, and what we mean is that they show up. Sure, there we go. Will show up and can be considered under this umbrella, but for the purpose of the talk, these are kind of the main ones that we're talking about. But aren't we all a little? So help me if I hear this one more time. But aren't we all a little bit ADHD? Or I think my favorite one is, yeah, but I'm just going nonverbal for a bit. That's not how that works, just in case you're wondering. Now, there is a little bit of truth that we might all be a little. I've already said that our brains work very differently. And what these conditions are made up of is a bunch of traits. And each one of these traits lives on a spectrum. So you may be slightly inattentive. You might be easily distractible. That does not mean that you have ADHD. And my difference in this is that I equate this to, if someone marched a brass band down the middle of your office, that's going to be distracting. I love the one about a squirrel, but if I walk a dog through the middle of your office, I don't care if you have ADHD or not. You want to pet that dog. That's not an abnormal or an extreme trait. That is something standard. Being distracted is a trait we all have. That's not a bad thing. The problem with the traits when it comes to, say, ADHD, is that my traits are so severe that they interfere with my life. And we'll talk a little bit about why this becomes a disability. But what you don't understand, and my extreme level of distractibility, means that I could sit in this room, you could turn everything down, and I can tell you that I've been listening to the air conditioning the entire time I've been talking, and that I find it very, very loud. Or that I will pick my fingers until they bleed because my brain has to have a distraction. I would rather not. Hangnails are really painful. But if I'm bored, my brain has to have that stimulation. It is not an option for me. It's not a dog that I want to pet. And all of these will create a condition. Now, there will be people who have ADHD who their level of distractibility isn't what creates an issue. It could be their hyperfixation. So I was talking to my mom about my diagnosis after, and she was like, yeah, we did think that you got tested, but the doctor said that you could sit down and read a book. So obviously you couldn't have ADHD. So yes, I can sit down and read a book. I hyperfixate on books. It's a really handy trait to have. It made it really easy for school. I could read it, regurgitate it. My problem is, especially with fiction, if I'm really enjoying the book, if it's 2 a.m. and I have half a book to go, I'm not putting it down. Those neurotypicals will be able to set that book aside and go, I can finish that in the morning. My brain does not do that. My brain I can logically tell myself that I'm going to stay up until 6 a.m. reading and I have work tomorrow and this is really detrimental to me, but I'm not going to put it down. Also, if it's part of a series, I'm probably going to start the other book, and that's going to be really bad decision-making. And this is what we mean by everything sits on this. So that middle picture is a lovely graphic illustration of what's called a spiky profile. It's used a lot in autism. And what you can see there is kind of the standard diagnosis traits of what is considered when someone is getting an autism diagnosis. And you can see that everyone ranks higher or lower, and it's a very handy way of showing this. I gave this talk, a version of it, back in Wales, and actually someone in the audience gave me the perfect analogy. It's like having a sound mixer board. So I can put everything down, and I can change the dials. And you want to know the best part? Depending on my mood, if you're a woman, and I'm sorry to say this, if you're on your cycle, If you are going through menopause, those can still change. It doesn't change my diagnosis, but it can definitely change what trait is affecting me more, which can make it really hard. So, and each one of these lives on a spectrum. So you have everything from sensory avoidant to sensory seeking. And you can be anywhere on that trait, and I am both. Depends on if I've been overstimulated. You can also have nonverbal to hyperverbal. I'll let you take a guess about which one I am. So, my favorite, but you don't look autistic, and other misguided stereotypes. These are what hurt people, especially in the workforce. These are those either conscious or unconscious biases that we live with. We are just lazy. That's my favorite. I've been called lazy a lot in my life. It's not that I don't want to pick up that hanger that I've walked past on the floor every day for, about 6 months. I can look at it. I can see it. I can stand next to it. I can beat myself up for it. I can get increasingly frustrated for myself. And it does not matter. I will still not pick it up until the one day that suddenly I can. And I don't get to choose that day. Oh no. I would love to be able to choose my hyperfixations. I would love to choose when my executive functioned. I don't get that choice. And the people that you're working with, because we talked about the statistics, that probably 1 in 5 of the people in this room have some sort of spectrum or condition that's on this list. They don't either. It doesn't make us less. I have 5 jobs. I would not say I'm lazy. I run 3 of my own companies. Don't think I'm lazy. But what's perceived as lazy and what people can visually see tends to be really detrimental to us. What are other things? Oh, we're less intelligent. Or we're Rain Man. There are no in-betweens. It's our job to fix it. So I have to be fixed in order to fit in. It's not a company's job to provide me, accessibility options. It's not them to make adjustments. It's not their responsibility to help me find what adjustments I need. No, I can either know what adjustments I need or, that's not our problem. We can't handle the stress. ADHD is actually incredibly good at stress. It's why we're really good at cybersecurity and incident response. It's why there are an abnormal amount of people who have ADHD who work as paramedics. We thrive on it. That's literally giving me all the dopamine that I handle emergency situations so well. Give me a boring situation, that's not going to handle so well. We can't communicate. I love this one. No, we just don't communicate like you want us to. I do tend to be too blunt. I'm probably going to offend someone at some point. I mean that with the best of my intentions. I work a lot with small businesses, and if I'm giving you really blunt advice, it's because I care. It has nothing to do with me not caring. I don't hate you. Actually, the best thing I can do for you, in my mind, is give you that blunt feedback because I want you to succeed, and I can very painfully obvious see why you're not succeeding. We just want attention. No, I don't. I would rather sit in the back and not be seen. And we can't be empathetic. In fact, empathy is one of those that sits on that scale. So you can either have very low empathy, or you can have empathy like mine, where if I see a hurt snail, that I'm probably going to feel bad for it. I genuinely go past a crash on the highway and I will literally go, I really hope everybody is okay. Not because it's the right thing to do, it's because physically I feel their pain. It's kind of sucky. We're all alike. What I show as, how my symptoms show, especially publicly, are very different. It's also very different of what I look like publicly versus the person who got to my hotel last night at 9 p.m. and crashed and probably didn't say more than 2 words because I used up my energy. And we aren't listening if we aren't making eye contact. If I'm making eye contact, I am physically thinking about making eye contact and I'm not listening to anything that you're saying. Just in case you're wondering. Right now, I am literally, as I give this talk, going, I need to change who I'm looking at. Oh, I've looked at that person too long. I'm going to look at this side of the room. And it is something I have fundamentally trained myself to do. This isn't something that came naturally. And how these appear and how these stereotypes are, is kind of one of the reasons that girls especially aren't getting diagnosed. So there's a lovely, lovely stereotype of the little boy with a train and being obsessed with trains and tractors. So one of my best friends has an obsession with Taylor Swift. It's her thing. Just like that little boy with the train is her thing. She can tell you pretty much where every song topped on the chart. She can tell you when it came out. She can tell you her entire set list for most of her era tours because that is her thing. And that is much more acceptable because it's considered a fandom. You're just a super fan. You couldn't possibly be autistic. Being a fan is normal. Not at that level. So, well, actually, it's not all bad. So I love the Birkbeck 2023 Neurodiversity Report, and I will give a lot of credit to Lucy, who's over here. She gave a talk about this yesterday for putting me onto this report. And this is what the strengths that people said. So I know I just spent a long time about saying what I feel is wrong with ADHD and autism. But actually, we have a lot of strengths, and these are not what is being used in industry, and this is what we could be doing so much better. Ever wonder why someone who has ADHD or autism might have really good research skills? Because if I'm interested in it, I will spend every waking moment finding every single detail that could ever possibly be known. Creativity. What box? We like thinking outside of the box because we fundamentally just don't understand what the box is. Innovative thinking. This comes with entrepreneurialism, and entrepreneurialism doesn't necessarily have to be starting your own company. If you put them in teams to help innovate the way that you work, there are so many strengths that we don't talk about enough. Long-term memory, although not mine, like I said, I talk very much from a personal perspective. What is true for me is not true for everybody else, and what is true for everybody else is not true for me. My long-term memory, short-term memory, what memory? Visual spatial skills. I mentioned this with the dyscalculia, the dyslexia. They can see that. Modeling makes perfect sense. But don't take our word on it. So you're sitting here listening to me say, yeah, we have great skills. I mean, that's me being biased. I'm going to say I have great skills. I would like to come still talk with you guys. But actually, this is what employers said. So the maroon number up there is going to be what the employer said, and the gray is what the employee said. So you absolutely can see that one of the best skills that these employers who were asked on it's the same report as I was just talking about, is the creativity. It is their hyper-focus or their ability to work. So employers can start to see the benefits, which is great. That's probably the first step. This is the step that we were on a couple years ago when things are moving fast. The problem is so you finally recognize that I have worth. That's great. We hit step 1. I feel like that's kind of basic. But now you don't know how to support me. You don't know how to keep me in the role. You will hire me, you will let me burn out, and you will discard me because that is so much easier than actually putting in the effort to make sure that I'm comfortable. Which is great because, especially for autism, one of the best and most powerful traits that we have is being loyal. We don't like change. If I don't have to change what job I'm doing, I will stay there for like 60 years. That would make me comfortable. I really don't want to have to go interview. I don't want to have to, learn a new way to an office. I like patterns. I like, as much as my ADHD brain hates routine, I need it. And we're not making sure that things are being done in a way to keep us going. There are real challenges. I like pointing out the positives, but there are the negative traits. There are negative traits. It wouldn't be considered a disability if it wasn't. By the way, just my little soapbox. If you think you have any sort of neurodiversity and your company isn't supporting you because you don't have a diagnosis, under disability law, you do not have to have a diagnosis. Especially with those wait times at the moment, you're not going to be getting one for a while. You still have the legal right to have the support of the company. And that support is what will help kind of work with those negative traits. Understanding that a flexible schedule is the best schedule. There's a reason I work for myself. The lack of adjustments and support and knowledge. We're starting to get there with knowledge. I've been lucky enough to do some amazing training with the University of Bristol with Lucy. You guys are sitting in the room now. We're getting to that knowledge stage. The problem is it's the support and the adjustments that come after. And the fact that workplace culture, are not neurodivergent friendly, especially in cybersecurity. The after parties, not really autistic friendly. Just gonna throw that out there. Lots of drinking, lots of loud noise, not gonna be for me. Team building days, same thing. Meetings, I'm lucky I have the ADHD, so I will talk through the whole thing, but if I'm there, I will not let other people talk. I know my own weaknesses. But there are some real negatives here, and it is a disability. It sounds really bad, it's not considered a disability unless it's impacting you every day. And I know people really don't like using that disability word. It makes me sad. It has a lot of stigma behind it, especially with invisible disabilities. But it's something that we need to normalize talking about. Because yes, I have ADHD, and it is a disability. Because every day, every minute, there is not something in my life that's being impacted by my ADHD. So what should we be doing? Because I'm not going to leave it on a downer. I'm not. In the workplace, it's easy. And for me, it makes sense. I do community, I do culture, I do people, and I can almost guarantee that any of the things that are up here as an idea of what you need to work on as an organization, even as an individual, because change doesn't have to start at the top. It really doesn't. Being understanding, giving someone the room to be themselves starts at an individual level. And I guarantee that if you do that, it will help everybody on your team. Who would have thought more flexible arrangements for coming in later might also help carers and parents? Who would have thought that more accessible information means that policies and procedures that are easy to read and easy access will cut down on mistakes made by your company? It does. There's some proof about that. Who would have thought that mentorship and coaching that's available to everybody will help your company do better? So it really frustrates me when people say it's too hard to start, because it's not. I don't think most of the things on the screen behind me are actually that hard to implement. Sometimes you will notice that I haven't exactly put things like quiet spaces. I know for a fact there are some businesses that have offices that will never be able to fit a dedicated quiet area. That's not their fault. It's really not. It's, how historic English houses are built. Make disclosing a benefit. We're still not disclosing, and I don't blame people. I want to sit up here and say, be brave, disclose, it'll help. I showed you a statistic earlier that says 60% of the time it won't. So why put your neck on the line? Why potentially prevent yourself from getting that diagnosis, or from not getting that promotion because you've disclosed? I want to get us to a place where we're much more comfortable, and I can come to a talk in like 4 years and we're like, yeah, everybody's disclosed. This is great. I haven't had any bad repercussions. And that is why I talk about it, because that's where we need to get to, because we need to be embracing the different ways of thinking. We need to have the diversity of thought behind teams. Any questions?
No questions, but my goodness, you described my entire life from start to end. I've put a comment in there, if that's all right.
Of course.
I think we are, I know that we neurodivergent people are more susceptible to significant bullying and abuse. And not just in the workplace, and not just inside, which, by the way, I've had in spades, but in every other area as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I also think that we have higher levels of imposter syndrome. And if we've been brought up by narcissistic parents, which have in my case, then I think we're also more susceptible to that anxiety, because my parents did not accept my diagnosis at all. My dad had it in his hands with paper, threw it down on the floor and went, no, you're not, you definitely are not autistic. And when I asked why, it was because when you were at school, the teachers never said you're autistic, so therefore you can't possibly be autistic. I went to school in the 70s.
I love that. So I will touch base on a couple of things you said. Absolutely, that we are more prone to imposter syndrome. There was an amazing study done by a psychologist that between up until the age of 10 to 13, that we'll hear about 30,000 times more negative reinforcements. It's about 4 every day when you do the math, if you discount the fact that they're probably not going to be, when you're a 1 or 2 year old quite yet. That's still normal toddler. So absolutely, we've been taught that we need to fit in for most of our lives. We've told that we're not. And that is where, unfortunately, either a lot of the unconscious bias comes in, or where the conscious bias comes in, is that people like sameness. It's how we connect as a community. There's some sociology. Literally, there's an entire study about how people interact together, and a lot of them will come down to we like people who are similar to us, which is why if you're my friend, I have some really bad news about your neurodiversity. Just throwing that out there. But it means that in areas where people who are more neurotypical we are oddities. We're considered a danger because their brain recognizes that we don't act like them, and it flags a historic danger response because I suddenly don't know how you're interacting with me. That's terrifying. And it's something that we should be good enough to be preventing now. And that's where the change really does need to happen. Matt.
Yeah, more of a comment, really. Absolutely love that. Please speak a little bit. I just wanted to say, I'm with Fern Brady on this one. I don't know if anyone's seen the video that she's done, but do look it up on YouTube, because I don't think we talk about how weird neurotypicals they are, and how much they want to smooth things over when you tell them that you're neurodiverse, or you've got autism, or ADHD, or whatever. And the thing they always say that really winds me up is, oh, but it's a superpower. And what Fern said was, is it really, instead of having superhuman strength and flying around the world, what would it be like if, like Superman, monologued to you at length about the poet Sylvia Plath for hours without any ability to register your disinterest in him, So I think it's time to change the conversation and start looking at it being a difference. I mean, again, it is a disability, but in some respects, but, let's recognise the difference here.
Is that it, Matt?
It is, yeah.
I was about to say, go watch Fern Brady's, if you don't know who Fern Brady is, she was on Taskmaster. She's also an amazing comedian. Besides that, definitely go see her take on autism. It's amazing. There's also an amazing Australian comedian who's on the Instagrams. Joe, who, funny enough, does an entire series about how neurotypical sound to neurodiverse and how absurd it can be. So I 100% do that. I'm not going to apologize for putting a QR code. I'll let you scan it at your own risk. It could be malware, or it just could be a link to my LinkedIn. I'll let you guess. But actually, please, if you do want any more information, I'll be outside. And also, shameless plug is there. I am doing a second talk later this afternoon in track 2 about actually public speaking. So if you want to come talk at a B-Sides, please come to that. Because eventually, and I'm going to say the same joke, so you have a heads up, you're going to get tired of hearing me, I promise. So you guys need to come up here and speak. But thank you very much.